Good afternoon, Derrick. How are you doing
Blessings,
today,
my
bro?
brethren. Yeah, man, I'm good, and yourself?
I'm very well, thank you. Sun is shining over there, yeah?
Giving thanks, it's the best. So grateful. Yeah. Sun, some nice wind, some nature going. Yeah.
Same here, man. We got lovely weather here too. But yeah, so you're in Johannesburg,
Yes,
which
sir.
is amazing, an amazing city for obviously so many reasons. Um, and yeah, obviously we met a couple of years ago when I was in South Africa, and we met in
Cape
Cape
Town.
Town.
Yeah.
And yeah, and Cape Town's also a beautiful place. But yeah, I think maybe one of the first things that would be really interesting to hear is, yeah, what's the kind of vibe and response been like to this whole pandemic where you are now in Johannesburg?
Yeah, it's been, well, oddly enough, it's been kind of, they've implemented a kind of similar response to what the US has done, kind of, you know, for lack of a better word, kind of this, very stringent draconian lockdown kind of situation. And, I suppose majority of the people, are just kind of going to, you know, accept and, conform. And I think it was more, accepted and okay in the beginning because it was like, okay, it's going to be a week or two just to flatten the curve.
A week or two.
Yeah. So it seems like everybody was played. Like, no, okay, it's fine. Yeah, going ahead, and then yeah, here we are, maybe 2.5 months, or
Yeah,
going.
yeah.
Yeah,
And you said the death rate in, or the mortality rate in South Africa and where you are is so low, but still they took these measures.
yeah, very low. And in fact, when they implemented the lockdown, and what's interesting, not to really far in, but prior to that, Cyril Ramaphosa, the president of South Africa, actually was on the call with. That's a very uncanny situation happening there. But yeah, prior to the lockdown, there was actually zero deaths, right? And the infection rate was something in the 50s, basically nothing. Could have been like between 20 to 50s there.
Mm.
Very low, very, very low, and apparently they discovered it very soon, very early. So it's been interesting to me. My question is like, okay, so why wasn't that contained then? Because they say apparently the source of the person who brought it in was apparently from Italy. I don't know what this Italian was doing out here, somewhere. I don't know. The stories are weird, but yeah, I don't understand why then those numbers so small, easy to pretty much quarantine and isolate and observe and test and do what they ought to do, um, and work that out. But instead, it was just like, okay, global panic, and of course, South Africa is being informed by the WHO. So it's pretty much a top down, what's this, implementation rather than a contextual one, which looks at the demographics, and the region,
Yeah.
and what's happening with the country. I mean, even the economic component, and to see that, okay, what there hasn't been a proper risk assessment, process, and even really a strategic process to really just actually either contain the virus, and but then not to destabilize everybody's lives in the sense. So yeah, people, some people with it, and some, more and more people now are kind of like, no, this is crazy. And the DA is a political party here, and it's a direct opposition to China. China, direct opposition to what's this, ANC, which is the currently ruling party, and they've really made a strong stance and statement against the lockdown policy,
Okay.
that it is first and foremost far too long, and it's not contextual and these kind of things. And so they even stated that the lockdown will cause way more damage to people than the virus itself, with regards to public health and economics, because those two kind of coincide. So yeah, it's interesting. A lot more people, to my surprise, I didn't really, think that, yeah, there would be kind of like, opposing voices
Mm,
kind of like that. So more and more people are, you know, kind of seeing, I don't know, through the holes a little bit. And there's some who are just kind of in the center, like, oh, we don't really know what's going on. And
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
so
and it's yeah, man. It's such a strange situation, and obviously, yeah, you were mentioning as well before this that we're getting to a situation where shops aren't letting you enter unless you're wearing a mask, and the implementation of making mask wearing compulsory,
mhm,
and also you make a really interesting point there as well about what on earth are the crazy ramifications of a global lockdown, and why
exactly.
are they being made
Hmm.
against a
Hmm.
virus that clearly has a very low mortality rate? And I don't think
Very
that's outrageously controversial to say. I think that for sure at the beginning of this pandemic, there's reason to have a little bit more uncertainty. What is this virus? We haven't seen it before. It's confusing. Um, but by now, it seems evidently clear that this is something that isn't as bad as it was once thought to be.
it was on. So yeah, as you say that, I don't know if I mentioned it already, but right now, 2.5 months in, almost finishing a third month, right? Because when May and lockdown here was implemented in March, right? So March, April, May, this is the 18th today, if I'm not mistaken, or 19th, something,
18th, yeah, yeah,
right? So basically, we passed the halfway mark, So it's a little over 2.5 months, okay? And within this last 2.5 months, the stated deaths, apparently from COVID-19, is 219 in the last 2.5 months. So considering how much more people die from cancer and heart disease in South Africa, obesity is a big problem. And interesting enough, even places like TB hospitals, there's a TB hospital in a place called Port Elizabeth, which basically sent away TB patients. And TB is very, very virulent and
tuberculosis.
dangerous. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I found it a bit ironic or interesting that a TB hospital will close down in an anticipation of an apparent wave, you know, that never seemed to really arrive. And so we look at how many more people would die because of the lockdown, because of course now people don't really have much access to hospitals, because if they say don't go to the hospital unless yeah, even if you have symptoms, just stay at home, which is which is weird. So if you really concerned about public health, then if people who really are in need to go for medical attention, they probably should, and can't be closing down such places for what is by now the science clearly says it's a it's a flu like um what says infection. It behaves similar to the flu. And yeah, there's some variations here and there. However, the mortality rate still remains lower than the flu, because the flu is um yeah, has a higher fatality rate. Pneumonia has a higher fatality rate, and those two in fact are more infectious. you know
Yeah,
um
and
yeah,
and there's this whole vibe of every time you enter a car, there's the risk you can crash, right? I mean, car crashes happen in the thousand day in, day out.
mhm,
Um, but I have to say, man, I'm just a bit like whatever this is, it's doing very well to sap the energy of any sort of contrasting opinions, because it's like,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, I mean, when this first started happening, it was very concerning and all of that, and then you start scratching under the surface and looking at alternative information, and for me, it seemed obvious that yes, something else is at play here,
mm,
but you kind of get to a point, which I think we're seeing now, which is a bit disturbing as well, is that it's becoming very normalized, right? It's becoming,
Yeah,
people are becoming comfortable with,
the new normal. It's a
yeah,
scary, for me, it's a very concerning term, a new normal.
totally, totally, man.
Mm.
And it's very strange. It's very strange. And yeah, it'd just be interesting to hear a bit about your perspective. Because because one of the other first things, right, is that, you know, they were telling you wash your hands, wear a mask, all of this stuff, and there wasn't much in the media about, well, make sure you're getting in your vitamins, you know, watch your diet, you know,
Yes, yes.
things like that. Drink lots of water. It was all just fear and kind of
Mhm.
negativity, right? And
Mhm.
yeah, you seem to have done a lot of kind of like research into nutrition of late. It'd be really interesting to hear some of the things you found and a little bit of the context for that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So firstly, to that point of, the fear mongering, and I think they've really done a good job of scaring people to death, both, figuratively and literally, seriously, because, as we know, fear it really reduces, what's this, your anti-inflammatory properties, and it really upregulates your inflammatory compounds and diminishes the immune system. So it's interesting that not one single time in any of the media was there a mention of, okay, get your nutrition correct, eat properly, so that you can bolster your immune system. Because as we've known, this is according to, scientific consensus, which I find, quite befounding, really, um, that even this kind of consensus is all of a sudden just gone. That, you know, your main line of defense, right, is your immune system, right? This is what we've known since, you know, um, time immemorial, if if we use those terms, right? And your immune system is, um, what's this, responds to environmental signals, or your entire body responds to environmental signals. And whatever environmental signals you receive, and environmental signals can vary. That's food, that's sun, that's fresh air. We're such a diverse piece of mechanism, the and responding to our environments. So it's been interesting to me that conversation, that medical conversation, very important conversation, has not been involved at all, in the dialogue, right? Nobody has said, oh, in fact, you make sure you do get sun. You need to be out in the sun, because the sun is antimicrobial, number one, and it also ameliorates the effects of radiation, daily exposure to radiation, and a bunch of other things. It assists in blood flow and oxygen circulation. It, in fact, allows more absorption and accessibility of iron in the system. And iron is probably one of the most important mineral, and fluorine, to be specific, because that is what conveys oxygen to pretty much your organs. The blood conveys oxygen to the rest of your organs, and the brain. So it's things like that. And nutrition, where we know inflammatory foods weaken the immune system, and makes it more susceptible. And yeah, so it's been interesting that conversation is not there. And even another one, social isolation, right? The field studies show, and it's just, even without the studies, we know innately that social isolation is actually more detrimental to, yeah, human health, because we thrive on um, social interaction, and these kind of things. So when we're in fear and hiding from each other, and it's interesting now that people have become scared of each other. Like the relationship has changed. Like if you go out, for example, I remember I was at the store, and yeah, I didn't have a mask on. um, I didn't bother getting it at the time, because like, if you scared, then wear a mask. I'm not really. But
Also,
it,
sorry to cut
yeah,
in, but there's also reason to believe that masks aren't even the healthiest thing to be wearing, because it's helping you, recycled air and stuff. You're not getting fresh air, Like, that's why I can't understand why I'm seeing people wear masks in the fresh air. I
Right.
mean,
Yeah. Do you know, to that point, I'll get to the specifics of the mask in a little bit, but to that point, here, there's been, situations where, people are, just individuals, like just, it could be one person, like on the beach, right? By themselves. Look at this, by themselves, nobody around them, right? But then they would be chased down by police, right? And isn't, so my thing is, isn't there a social distancing, regimen that's been put in place? So why, police not practicing social distancing? Because if I am, in an open, space, nobody's around me, or there's hardly anybody around me, right? Minding my own, why then would somebody infringe upon that, space and come into your space, um, yes, so that's been interesting. But the mask thing, right, is there was a study done in South Korea. I forget the name of the authors, but it's very easily accessible. And yeah, they studied the use of both surgical and the cloth mask, the general cloth mask, right? And yeah, basically the conclusions of the study said, and these are the words. That first and foremost, they're both masks, surgical and cloth masks, are inefficient, and are not effective in, what's this, stopping infection or protecting one from infection. Yeah, and in fact, there's more what's this, contamination on the mask, and interesting enough, on the outside of the mask, there's way more, contamination. So I don't get why that, particular kind of, science is not being implemented, in this, in these policies, right? They keep saying wear a mask, wear a mask. And the point that you mentioned is, if you're wearing a mask, right? Okay, so we know that oxygen is the more, is most important, because without it you die, right? And so what happens when you put on a mask, right? You've restricted airflow, because naturally your air needs to flow freely, through, in and out, right? So if you have a mask on continuously, right, and you're breathing in pretty much your carbon dioxide, because you're breathing it out, and it's just recycled, so it's festering. And then, of course, these masks, most of them being cloth masks, of course, retain moisture. And, because this is hot, warm air, back and forth. So, of course, it's going to create a kind of, perspiration situation happening. So, since they say that this, COVID-19 situation spreads through, aerosols, and it spreads through the air, and if you have it, right, would it then not make sense that you continuously, breathing in, this situation kind of puts you, at risk for kind of infecting yourself, or, or for
yeah,
that matter, you have the mask on all the time, right? And the contamination is way more on the outer surface of the mask than it is on the inner surface of the mask. But you keep taking this mask on and off, because you got to drink, you got to
yeah,
talk, or you got to do whatever, or you get back home from wherever you are, you take this thing off,
yeah.
right?
And I
So
get, and
what is
obviously, and you're not suggesting that obviously in hospitals you can understand why in certain scenarios masks are necessary, right? It's
Yeah, yeah. No, of course. I mean, that this is why surgeons wear masks, right? It's so that, they either don't, sneeze or cough into the, wounds or whatever the surgical, place which they're operating, and also at the same time to protect them from, any, you know, kind of, let's say, blood or whatever the case that they're working on, so that also, they don't get contaminated with it. So, in the hospital setting, there is a reason for it, and, a clear reason for it,
yeah,
and yeah, nobody can really, dispute that. But however, if you out in the open world, right, you need, good air, circulating. And already we have such an issue with air pollution, so it's kind of like,
yeah,
a double whammy,
yeah,
you know. And also, here's another thing with the mask and the gloves thing, right? And again, of course, this is not to suggest that, people don't wear mask or whatever. It's just, just look at it critically, and, use some common sense reasoning, on top of already, the scientific study. But just on the reasoning, in of itself, it's like these masks and gloves, unlike your body, right, your skin, do not generate antibodies, against, you know, bacterial and, kind of viral, exposure, right? That we get to expose anyway, every day we get exposed to these things, Um, so since COVID-19, as they say, stays on surfaces, right? Plastic, whatever. I think what they said was like 3 days or something like that, up to 3 days, on the surface, right? What is a what's a glove and what's a mask? It's a surface. Surface like any other surface, right? They're not made from the cloth, maybe some of them.
Got a bit of wind noise going on there, mate.
Sorry. I try to.
It's turned into a storm. You got to,
Is it?
they've heard your words. The wind has heard your words. They're trying to silence you. They're trying to silence you, bro.
They've even got the wind going, man. Wow. Okay, seems to be cooling down a bit. Let me know. Otherwise, I can move to a more less windy place. I suppose. Is that better?
Yeah, I think that's a bit better now.
Okay. So, anyway, as I was saying, like these, products, are surfaces, and chances are, when you get your mask and things like that, somebody has already, touched it, or it's been in proximity with other items, right? Which, chances are have already been, contaminated one way or another, because this is, of course, not the first, coronavirus type, thing. It's a mutation of something that already coronavirus that existed, according to them, right? This is their own, data, and so if that is the case, then a lot of these things have already been contaminated, and particularly with COVID-19, because they say like it's infection rate is so high, and it's if it's staying on all these surfaces, you possibly cannot control every surface or disinfect every surface, so anyway, there's all this bacteria that remains behind, right? on either the gloves or the mask, and so you go around touching everything else, so you're pretty much spreading those bacteria, because it's not like your skin, which you can kind of wash it off, or generate and bacteria that kind of kill off the other bacteria, you see, these antibodies or antigens, or whatever the case may be. So
what's really going on here, bro?
Man, I suspect like a lot of foul play happening, just given the inconsistencies, at least for me, the inconsistencies, the data first and foremost, right? With things like influenza and pneumonia, which are, this is what they say, right? It's a pneumonia-like, right? Virus, right? So pneumonia and influenza. The other day I checked on Worldometer. Per month, influenza is about 14 to 16,000 people per month, that die from, influenza, right?
Where's that?
No, it's just I checked on the Worldometer, so I think it's globally.
Okay. Oh, okay.
You see, yeah, so that's happening, per day. It was per month, right? Pneumonia, way more, right? And with COVID-19, it's like clearly the data clearly shows that the death rates are not that high, number one, and they're not as high as they were projected to be. You know?
And what's a real shame? What's the real shame is, I don't know the full extent of the reason behind this, but this decision to list COVID-19 on the death certificates, even if it hasn't been the direct cause of death, it's like, what the fuck, man?
Yeah, no, for real though. Do you know what? In the early days of the lockdown here in South Africa, just early March, right? I remember watching the news, and then I had at the same time simultaneously the data from WHO running, showing the numbers, infection numbers, death numbers, right? I had it simultaneously running, I had also, collated on a sheet of paper, and I was watching the news at the same time. And what what I found, interesting was that the numbers was exaggerated in the news. Like way more numbers were shown on the news than there were at the time on the, on the live count on WHO website. So my question was it somebody misinformed, or was this, deliberate exaggeration, right? Because it's like we know mainstream media to be very, you know um, exaggerative, and you know they, it's mainstream media. We know what they do, right? In that sense, they need to, for whatever reason, numbers, money. It's yeah. And so I found that already in of itself, like as a red alarm. It's like, no, but why is, the numbers in WHO showing different clearly, right? Because on the WHO was much lower, and then on the news here was much higher. So it's like, whoa, what is going on, so that was like kind of like early um, bells for me. And then when news came out, and it's just like it's public, right? It's like any death will be listed. If somebody, you know, uh, tested positive for COVID-19, the cause of death is listed as COVID-19. And if somebody suspected to be COVID-19, the death, on the death certificate can be listed as COVID-19. And I mean, they said that, yeah, we have been generous in the allocation of, you know, deaths by COVID-19 on the death reports, And so, yeah, for me, it's like, okay, so why would you do that? Why, if somebody died from another, disease, why would you name COVID-19? So it's like, it's more accurate to write that they died with COVID-19 than from COVID-19, but they say
Yeah.
from COVID-19. And
Clearly, yeah.
again,
Sorry, clearly
mhm,
yeah, unfortunately the data is kind of very unreliable at this stage. And it doesn't, yeah, it's a shame, because us as the public, we have to, a lot of us, not all of us, some of us look at alternative news, but a lot of us have to rely on the mainstream media figures. Um, but
mhm,
essentially, yeah, man, I think there is a lot of things that we can be doing in our day to day and stuff to keep our immune system strong and whatnot. And I think one thing that is really interesting is um, your journey into um, taking more of an interest in nutrition. It'd be really interesting. I know you said that you'd been to Jamaica and done further research. It'd be really interesting to hear what you learn and why it's so important in a time like now.
mhm. Yeah, that so I've been doing, nutrition research for a good amount of years now. I'd say about 10 years now, because that's about as long as I've been quote unquote plant-based, vegan, as you want to call it. But so I've always been interested in nutrition and been, reading up on nutrition. But actually, the first encounter was through qigong, right? So I started practicing qigong, years ago. And one of the first things, that I was taught was pretty much majority, if not all, of the diseases and ailments that we suffer are coming from overeating or food, period. And so they had, a whole what's this chapter on, food, what foods you should eat, which foods are, beneficial for this and that. So my journey started, through that particular paradigm, more, a kind of spiritual paradigm, to kind of, change my state of being, right? In order to, yeah, become hopefully, a more, a better person, right? And more healthy and clear of mind, what have you, just change up my spiritual energy, if you can call it that. And then, yeah, so through the years, independent research, I had the opportunity last year to go and study with Dr. Aris Latham, who is a food scientist, right, biologist. So I did a mentorship in, yeah, food biology and nutritional sciences. Um, so I learned a lot about, yeah, just how food, interacts with the system, what actually, causes, such and such diseases, and I had many what's this references and studies from Professor Hilton Hotema to Professor Arnold Ehret and many others. So I had a lot of manuals and yeah, a lot of research data to work with and to work through. And on top of that, I had his mentorship. So we had daily lecture sessions, and he would break down nutrition science, foundation of particular foods, and fasting was a very powerful experience to learn about. So learn the science of fasting and how to enter a fast, how to break a fast, and the importance of fasting, and what it constitutes in the healing mechanisms of the body. Because essentially it's like the body is always healing itself, right? And it's all it is that once you give it the context, or supply the conditions for it, then it can do that. But if you supply the conditions for disease, then the body will get diseased. And why it gets diseased is that it's actually fighting off um, an imbalance. That's essentially essentially what disease is, contrary to what we think believe disease to be, as this thing that attacks us. It's actually the body's response to toxicity, primarily toxicity, and other imbalances from environmental signals that we receive or give to it, right? So yeah, learning about the foundation of disease and how essentially something. Okay, so for example, this is not like a talk on curing COVID-19, but since COVID-19 is a respiratory condition, right, which means mucus forms in the lungs and yeah, hardens, right? And it kind of almost points to what Dr. Sebi says, and pretty much all the cause of disease is mucus, right? So I found that statement interesting in light of COVID-19, as they claimed it to be a mucosal kind of situation, same to, as pneumonia, right? So yeah, in this process of dealing with mucus, it's like once you eliminate the mucus, the conditions improve, right? Because essentially you've removed the obstruction, which are clogging up the airways, right? And yeah, pointing to the works of, yeah, I'm sure you're familiar with them, Dr. Colin T. Campbell, Dr. Esselstyn, right? And even Dr. Michael Greger on, reversing things like heart disease, through diet and lifestyle changes. Dr. Dean Ornish, to, move to the West, right? Which this science, which is relatively, new in the West, has been there in the indigenous, populations for God knows how long, right? And yeah, so moving back to a more what's this, condition observancy, if I could put it that way, because we don't observe the conditions which create the disease. So we often just look at the disease, never like, okay, where is it coming from, what's causing it, and what is the body's mechanism in place to defend itself against these things, right? So yeah, it was a powerful experience. And oh yeah, furthermore to that, I had the further half of my mentorship, I was staying at a Rasta village, and that was again another powerful experience, which was, yeah, I learned a lot about herbal medicine, herbal tinctures. And in fact, one of the elders there, he used to be blind, and literally you know cured his blindness through herbology. And it's, for me, just like wow. And the thing is, this is really a real life experience. It's not some claim and things like that. You can still see the when people get blind, you can get kind of see this tint over their eyes, and he still has it, but he can see perfectly well. um so yeah, there was just a lot that I learned, and it was so on the ground, so it wasn't scientific papers and these kind of things, but it was just really experiential, to see how they organize themselves, and how they go about food, because food is very important. So they have like an organic farm, and they make their own oils and these kind of things, for remedial purposes, and also for whatever the purposes that they want,
Mm.
and yeah. I learned a whole lot, in that, and it gave me context, at least now, to in where I am right now, at least now as a natural health practitioner. It's like it gave me so much more context on how to deal, with disease, not in this medical model, but in a lifestyle model, right? Where you, it's like preventive, right? Where you look at what's causing the disease and then you ameliorate the conditions, change the conditions or adjust the conditions so that disease doesn't occur. And so, in light of this, COVID-19, like that is, yeah, it's interesting to me that that conversation is not there. It's just the same old, okay, drugs, or vaccines, as you hear now, mandated vaccines, which is like, wow. There's been those mentions of mandated vaccines. And so, you know, yeah, I find it interesting that, it seems like the healthy people are the biggest threat to health. That's how, it's kind of categorized now. As YouTube said, it's going to ban anybody that says, oh, boost your immune, use vitamin C, turmeric. That goes against, WHO guidelines. And what really are the WHO guidelines, right? Lockdown, masks, right? Which have been shown to be worse in the process of trying to, improve public health. So yeah, to me, it's interesting that those are the, primary voices, guiding healthcare when, it seems like there's more people sicker. People are way sicker, um, than before. So yeah, it really is baffling, and it for me, it's like, it doesn't point to anything else but, foul play from, pharmaceutical industry, corporations, as we've known though for years. It's not a conspiracy. It's just like, we know, follow the financial trail, right? Money is the, major player in, in these situations, and particularly when it comes to big corporations and, those who run them. It's about profit, cheap inputs, you know um and then, yeah, just cheap buys from them. They buy it cheaply, but
Yeah,
but people have to kind of put things, very, expensive inputs. So it's, yeah, they just make profit on people being ill, and, and they make profit from people needing, from being ill, people needing to purchase, whatever drugs and things that
yeah,
they've, put in place or put in the market, which most are not even, tested. You know, um, so I find that interesting. I mean,
yeah. No, I think it's very, very crazy. It's very concerning. I think there is this deep connection with money, capitalism, and big pharma. And I think we
yeah.
all need to keep a very wary eye on who
Mm.
are positioning themselves in a place to be able to profit from this crisis. And I
Mm.
think, yeah, we just have to be very cautious with any suggestions made by anyone in positions of power, because as history tells us,
Yeah, yeah,
there's always people looking to exploit crises. But yeah, I think it was really interesting hearing what you've
they
learned
have.
about
Mm.
nutrition. And I think, yeah, T Colin Campbell wrote the China study, and that's a book that's definitely been influential to me, and leading me into my path to like a plant-based diet. um but yeah, man, do you know what, you have so much interesting stuff to say. I'd actually love to, because I don't think we'll be able to fit in all of, because I would love to go into vaccines and Bill Gates and all of that stuff with you as well,
Mm.
and
Mm.
so much other stuff, quite frankly. But I don't think
Yeah, yeah,
it'll all
quite a
fit
lot.
into this conversation. But yeah, would you be up for hopping on again fairly soon? For
Most definitely, yeah. I mean, it's great. Firstly, catching up and having this conversation, which I really feel is so important, and I think we all need to be having these conversations, from a balanced perspective, and from really a reasoning perspective. Like it seems like a lot of common sense is out the window, right now, because there seems to be so much fear that nobody's thinking, like just calmly, and just like, okay, looking at the situations, for what they are and how they are, So there's too much hysteria, and these kind of conversations are somehow, trigger or, quote unquote, when it's like, when you just really look at them, the, it's sensible. Like, look at the sensibility, and then even on top of that, look at the science, what the science is showing, and what the studies, and the data, is showing, and just listen to what they are saying versus what's actually going on, and put two together, and yeah, start
Yeah,
to kind of,
completely.
have these reasons, because otherwise I think the power is way too centralized, as we know. I mean, majority of media is pretty much owned by, almost six corporations or five corporations, and now the number of billionaires who kind of like run these corporations are, has been, reduced to five, and so, we have to really consider, like, following the paper trail and see who has vested interest, look at conflict of interest, because we're not looking at that. I mean, okay, we're not going to go into Bill Gates right now, but,
Yeah,
just one small quick point is, somebody who's never had any medical training and none at all. I mean, for the more, the man didn't even finish university, dropped out of college, right? And, the Microsoft situation, was, and a situation of
yeah.
theft, like,
It's there's
that's
so much. I mean, Bill Gates. We could
oh
write
man,
essays and
we can
essays
write an essay, you
on
know.
why he's not the one that we should put our faith in this
So
crisis.
yeah, so I mean, somebody like that informing, the WHO, and him being the second largest fund of WHO, and this is where we're getting our information, and this is the person that's informing our leaders,
Yeah,
and our people on, certain things. I think we just have to kind of look at these things in a, yeah, and just in a balanced light. It's because it's not about like, yo man, sometimes you receive like, some like bashing, and it's like, whoa. And,
yeah,
um
totally,
yeah,
totally.
it's weird. It's weird.
I completely agree with you, man, and it is. It's very refreshing to hear you being so passionate about all these things, and I'm glad you are, because we need people to continue putting this pressure on the mainstream narrative. But yeah, man, Derrick, as always, man, lovely to speak to you, and really, really nice to actually see you,
Yeah, yeah,
albeit through a screen. But yeah, we'll definitely catch up soon, and please do
yeah,
carry on sending me all these WhatsApp stuff as well, man. I like to stay
yeah,
informed.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's great. Yeah, I love the exchange. Yeah, a lot of
Uh,
information, lots of research, and if people want, we can share these things, because yeah, they're there. We're talking studies and papers, and
mm,
yeah, in news, and it's out there, and so yeah, I'm happy to have been able to catch up and have a kind of sane conversation, and kind of not feeling like I'm losing my mind,
yeah,
kind of
yeah. Don't
situation.
worry.
So,
We're all in this together, bro. But
yeah,
yeah, take
wonderful.
care, man. Look after
Brother,
yourself, bro.
yes, I likewise.